What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Chael Sonnen predicts toughest test for Jon Jones at heavyweight. Fight fans have been anxiously awaiting the heavyweight debut of pound-for-pound kingpin Jon Jones for 2 years now. In that time, the division has seen the title change hands from Stipe Miocic to Francis Ngannou, who presently reigns over the storied division. Given the number of elite heavyweights at the top of the division, there have been increasing debates regarding who Jones should fight first. This week, Chael P. Sonnen, who lost to Jones following a coaching stint on The Ultimate Fighter, explained why he believes that although Johnny Bones will inevitably be heavyweight champion, Curtis Blaydes can give him the toughest fight at heavyweight.
I got to see somebody that can defend a takedown, or I can't have a question with Jon. I think it's a real gun. Just the fact that he had 15 fights and was never taken down, I think there's something special there. I'll tell you the hardest fight, skill-wise, for Jon Jones, easily the hardest fight is Curtis Blaydes.
Sonnen's co-hosts agreed with him, questioning if Curtis Blaydes is the most underrated fighter on the entire roster. With a strong wrestling pedigree to go along with a reach that can nearly rival Jones's, the matchup between the two men is an interesting one. After winning his UFC London bout with Tom Aspinall via a knee injury, Blaydes' place in the division was even more unclear than it was before the bout. A winner of 4 of his last 5, the number 3 ranked heavyweight has since found himself lost in the shuffle at the top of the division. With indications that champion Francis Ngannou will be ready to defend his undisputed championship in early 2023, Gane, Miocic, Blaydes, and Jones all can make cases for the next crack at the belt. In the event that the UFC creates an interim belt at heavyweight, would you want to see Jones and Blaydes fight for it? Give us your thoughts down below. Aljamain Sterling wants Cejudo vs Cruz 2 for Triple C's comeback fight. Henry Cejudo's return to the octagon has been a long time coming. After Cejudo narrowly won the UFC Flyweight Championship over Demetrius Johnson in 2018, he defended the belt against TJ Dillashaw before then moving to bantamweight to chase champ status. After winning his second title at bantamweight, Cejudo was booked to defend the 135-pound strap against Jose Aldo. Unfortunately, the fight fell apart and former champion Dominick Cruz was set to step in for Aldo. When Cejudo and Cruz met at UFC 249, the Olympian defended his belt again to cement his status as Triple C. Following the fight, Cejudo retired from MMA, withdrawing from the USADA testing pool to further solidify his retirement. The move proved to be a temporary one, however, as 2 years later Cejudo ended his retirement and announced his plans to return by 2023. With the former champ's return looming, bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling couldn't help but weigh in on the situation.
He fought Dominick Cruz on short notice. Fight Dominick Cruz now. See what happens. It's a completely different situation. Dominick Cruz looked slow. He didn't look himself in that one. And you watch him of late compared to that performance, and you're like, there's a significant difference in the way he performed. And I'm not saying you can take something away from Cejudo. He performed, he was ready and prepared. That was a short notice fight. Fight Dominick Cruz on a full training camp. See what happens.
Do you want to see Cejudo and Cruz fight again given how lopsided the first fight was? Do you agree with Sterling and think that the Dominator didn't look like himself in the first meeting? Do you want Cejudo to fight someone else entirely? Right now, there are a lot of questions surrounding Cejudo's return, and as a result, we want to hear your answers. Sound off with your thoughts and Sterling's comments and Cejudo's return. And before we continue, make sure you give that like button some love and be sure to subscribe to the MMA Zone for all the latest news. The ones that got away. GSP lists the 2 fighters he wishes he fought. Over the course of his 28 professional fights, Georges St-Pierre truly shared the octagon with a who's who of MMA. With championships in 2 divisions and one of the most historic title runs in the history of the 170-pound division, one would think that GSP has done it all. Despite that, the UFC Hall of Famer can't help but wonder what could have been. Specifically, there are 2 bouts he wishes had materialized.
Well, I always wanted to be known as the best and be the best, and there's 2 fights that never materialized that could have been made, but for certain reason did not materialize. The first one was against Anderson Silva, and the other one was against Khabib, but for certain reason it did not happen.
The first is the long wished for bout between he and middleweight kingpin Anderson Silva. Throughout the course of both men's title reigns, the idea of a super fight between the two was repeatedly floated around by fans. With both men essentially cleaning out their divisions, many believed that a clash between the pair was inevitable. Despite that, it never materialized, and both fight fans and the former welterweight kingpin have been left to wonder, what if? The second is a fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov's father admittedly admired St. Pierre and wanted his son to fight like the welterweight great, before then eventually meeting him in the octagon one day. It's a scenario that fight fans have theorized about considerably. Would St. Pierre have been able to make the cut to lightweight? Or would the Eagle have gone up to welterweight? As it turns out, GSP has always wondered about the fight as well. St. Pierre explained that both fighters bring their terms to the UFC, who then goes about the navigating and negotiation process. To hear the former champ explain it, even if two fighters are interested in fighting, sometimes promoters can come up short on finalizing a deal. Do you think that St. Pierre would have been able to defeat both Anderson Silva and Khabib Nurmagomedov? Or would Silva's size and the Eagle's grappling be too much for GSP? Next up, Fight Roundup. UFC books 3 bouts for upcoming cards. With the end of the year rapidly approaching, it's no surprise that the UFC brass has begun to aggressively start matchmaking in order to round out upcoming cards. While blockbuster bouts like Poirier vs Chandler have been getting all the headlines as of late, there have been a slew of exciting fights announced for upcoming cards that have gone under the radar. The first fight we'll see before the end of the year is all but guaranteed to be a fight of the night contender. In the middleweight division, Duško Todorovic and Jordan Wright will square off on October 15th's Fight Night card at the UFC Apex. Both men will be entering the bout coming off a loss, and with the pair both 2-3 in their last 5, they could be in a must-win situation. The next fight we have coming up will be a pivotal featherweight scrap at the UFC Apex on November 5th, where undefeated prospects Bryce Mitchell and Movsar Evloev will collide to see who loses their undefeated status. Both men are coming off wins this year, with Evloev recently defeating Dan Ige this summer, while Mitchell picked up a unanimous decision win over Edson Barboza back in March. With the pair looking to break into the top 10 of a stacked featherweight division and both men's undefeated records on the line, fight fans can expect fireworks. The last bout in our Fight Roundup will help the UFC close out the year when Eric Silva and TJ Brown meet in the octagon on December 10th at UFC 282. The fight will see Silva look to pick up his first official win in the UFC after a dominant first round win on Dana White's Contender Series last month. Across from him in the octagon, fellow Dana White's Contender Series alum TJ Brown will be looking to return to the win column after a loss earlier this year dropped his UFC record to 2-3. And next up, we have UFC fighter Conor McGregor trolling MMA fans on Twitter. Listen to this.
The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter has ever seen. The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter has ever seen. The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter has ever laid eyes on. The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter's ever seen. The most power Twitter's ever seen. That's me, guys, the Notorious.
We have UFC fans questioning what stimulants Conor is taking at the moment. What do you guys think about this? Let us know down in the comment section below. Last up, how good of terms is Nate Diaz on with the UFC? We will see. Leading up to Nate Diaz's UFC 279 headlining bout, it was no secret that the Ultimate Fighter Season 5 winner was eagerly awaiting the end of his UFC contract. With his win over Tony Ferguson serving as an almost cinematic send-off for the outspoken Stockton Slugger, many questioned if this was the last we'd see of Diaz in the UFC. In his post-fight Octagon interview, Diaz explained that although he plans to compete in boxing, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu, he will eventually be back in the UFC. He continued, explaining that despite all of the conflict with the promotional brass over the years, he still had love for the UFC. According to Ariel Helwani, regardless of the kind words that Diaz shared in his post-fight Octagon interview, fight fans are about to see just how good of terms he left the UFC on after narrowly avoiding the one-sided affair the UFC had planned for his final fight.
And now we're going to see if he's leaving on good terms or bad terms. Because if he was leaving on good terms, his future plans couldn't be clearer. He wants to move on. He wants to box. If they are going to try to screw him, they could not waive the 3-month exclusive period. They cannot waive the 1 year to match. They could let this drag a really long time if they want.
The situation revealed by Helwani is an interesting one. While many believe that Diaz was free from his UFC contract after completing the bout, the latest revelation indicates that it could be 3 months before he's able to sign a contract to fight somewhere else. When Nate Diaz fights next, do you think it will be in the boxing ring or the octagon? Give us your predictions down below. Thanks so much for joining us today. What do you make of what's going on in the fight world? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all of the latest news from the MMA zone. See you next time.